immediately to solve that problem. And so he says, let's go back to what God told us and how God told us how to administer our affairs, and that was a problem. Okay, and so, but he also pointed out that Nehemiah was all in for this project to the point where he committed his own family resources to provide the support that they needed, and so he fed and housed those people who were responsible for overseeing the work. And it was no small task. And we see in the closing chapters of Nehemiah 5 that he asks for God's blessings. And his remember that we see that God rewards good works. And this is important. But we also need to remember that Nehemiah is not doing this seeking favor with God. Nehemiah is doing this because God has told him to do it and because he loves God and wants to follow God. And so he wants to do God's will. And that resolve to do God's will means that anything that he does that gets in the way of God's commission to him, and remember, he considers it God's commission to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem and restore the city and rebuild and repatriate the city. Okay, because as large as that city is, the paltry 53 or 54,000 people that are in there working on that city are not much. Okay, I mean, you can get 50,000 people in a football stadium, all right, in a small football stadium. And this is a city, a large city with large boundaries. Okay, so and you saw how we've seen that map before. But so what happens? There's a resistance that's springing up. That resistance, and remember that one of the reasons that they have held off as long as they have is because they did not think that these people, they did not think that these upstart Jews were capable of building that wall, finishing that wall, and getting everything set in place. And when that happens, remember, we've had this slander that's been laid against the Jews to start with. That has always been the contention of the surrounding nation, that their intent was to declare independence and to break away from Persia. And basically, they would go back, and their argument would be, well, they're intent on starting a civil war. Is basically what they're trying to charge them with, and so this continues. And what we're going to see in chapter 6, and indeed in chapter 7, if we get that far, is a conspiracy and the underlying reasons for that conspiracy. Okay. And I'll just say blood's thicker than water, and then we'll go from there. All right. So I'm going to have LaRon start reading for me, and LaRon, if you would please, I'm going to have you start reading. Read through verse 4, please.
Now it came to pass when Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arabian and the rest of our enemies heard that I had builded the wall, and that there was no breach left therein, though at the time I had not set up the doors upon the gates, that Sanballat and Geshem sent unto me, saying, Come, let us meet together in some one of the villages in the plain of Ono. But they thought to do me mischief. And I sent messengers unto them, saying, I am doing a great work, so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease, whilst I leave it, and come down to you? Yet they sent unto me 4 times after this sort, and I answered them after the same manner.
Okay, so now we see you've got that passage here, and I want to point out, as I have this diagram here, that the plain of Ono, it's 37 miles from the city of Ono. The villages surrounding it would still have him have had him expose himself, Nehemiah expose himself to the tune of 15 or so miles, 15 or so miles outside of the walls of Jerusalem. Okay, that's a pretty exposed position. So uh, uh, his assumption, and more than likely a very good one, is that they wanted to get him out there separated away from all of his people so that they could either A, attack him, or B, attack the city while he was gone. All right. So that was his intention. He said, nope, we're not, we're going to stay right here and we're going to do the work. Now, up to now, these communications have been more or less private between a handful of people. But remember that in those days, of course, they didn't have Twitter. Okay. But we've seen this thing called an open letter, where you write a letter to somebody and you have it published in the newspaper. Okay. So as we get to verse 5, we're going to see something along those lines. And if you would read, please, go ahead and read through verse 7, please, Laurent.
Then sent Sanballat his servant unto me in like manner the fifth time with an open letter in his hand.
And there's that open letter I was telling you about. Now, what does that mean? It means the man's going to stand up in front of everybody and he's going to read this letter out in public for the people in the city to hear, with the charges that he's laying out, and charging them all with sedition and saying, y'all are in a bunch of trouble. All right, keep going.
Wherein was written, it is reported among the heathen, and Gashmu saith it, that thou and the Jews think to rebel, for which cause thou buildest the wall, that thou mayest be their king according to these words. And thou hast also appointed prophets to preach of thee at Jerusalem, saying, there is a king in Judah, and now shall it be reported to the king according to these words. Come now, therefore, and let us take counsel together.
No, so he says, we need to get together and talk this out. Now, they're still saying you need to come outside and talk with us at this point, okay? But now it's an open challenge. Why? Because they are now taking their case to the people to try to get the people to change their mind and to put pressure on Nehemiah to do something different, to expose them and also to discourage them. This is psychological warfare, okay? All right, so their lies, obviously, none of this has transpired. We've seen Nehemiah as he has done this, and the people who are outside the walls who are working are not going to go out there and expose themselves to people in surrounding countryside and say, no, we're going to have our own king. They're going to go, oh, well, we can take care of that. All right? But then we get Nehemiah's response. Verse 8 and following. And if you would please just go ahead and read 8 and 9.
Then I sent unto him, saying, there are no such thing done as thou sayest, but thou feignest them out of thine own heart. For they all made us afraid, saying, their hand shall be weakened from the work, that it be not done. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands.
So now there's a prayer there. There's a prayer there, but the reason for this open letter is made plain, okay? That they had sought to discourage them, to weaken their hand. Actually, what it meant was weaken their minds, weaken their resolve, as they did, okay? Remember that strengthening the hands is also a description of mental resolve and of force and power and projection of that, okay? And so then he's going to go and talk to Shemaiah, one of the priesthood, okay? All right? And so verses 10 and 11, please.
Afterward I came unto the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was shut up. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us shut the doors of the temple, for they will come to slay thee. Yea, in the night will they come to slay thee. And I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there that being as I am would go into the temple to save his life.
And so
I will not go in.
I will not go in. And so that's what happens sometimes. You try to bait. You see it in politics a lot, where you try to bait a politician into saying something or doing something and getting one. And I can't remember who it was now, but one of the Democratic politicians back in the 70s who actually got the newspapers to get him to say, "Follow me around and see what happens." And they followed him around, and they caught him with a mistress in some island nation somewhere or another, and he had to resign. He had to withdraw from the race in the primaries. Okay, so there's what happens. And so they're trying. So this is a man, Shemaiah, who is trying to counsel him to shut himself up and hide. Now, with the leader, remember that Nehemiah was one who led from the front. He didn't push his people. He led them from a position of leadership from the front. If he shuts himself up and hides, what kind of a message is he sending to all those people? And so he talks about making a mistake, which he would call not only just an error. Remember, sin. He uses the word sin here, and remember that sin is one of those terms that means missing the mark. Okay, and in this particular case, it would harm the entire commission which he has of God if he does this. And so he says, "No, I'm not going to do that." And here's why. Continue on, please, through verse 14.
And lo, I perceived that God had not sent him, but that he pronounced this prophecy against me. For Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him.
Yeah, now I should have underlined that too. Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He perceived that this man was basically chosen or hired or paid to try to do that. Well, we've seen a lot of that. You remember whenever the priest was hired to curse Israel, and he didn't do it. Okay, he couldn't do it. But in this particular case, this is a conspiracy among men, and it's a political conspiracy as much as anything else. And so Nehemiah is not falling for it, and he sees him for what he is. He's in a hire. Now we're going to find out a little further on in Nehemiah just exactly why that is an issue. Okay, how that came to be. And remember, that's also going to explain a lot about why the rulers and even the priesthood were against Nehemiah. Okay, because remember, the priesthood, their rice bowl was pretty full all the time up to now. They had it good. And Nehemiah is kind of upsetting this apple cart for them. Okay, but we understand the reasoning for that as we continue on. And so he says, think upon Tobiah and Sanballat according to these works. This is an imprecatory. And on the prophetess Noadiah and the rest of the prophets that would have her put me in fear. The rest of the prophets, the rest of the priesthood is what he's talking about. When he says prophet here, he means preachers, priests of the church. And so he's alluding to a conspiracy among the priesthood to oppose the work that he's doing. Okay, and so we have to say that he's withstood it. He's prayed to God for strength, and he's prayed to God for their comeuppance and their downfall as well. Imprecatory prayer, which was not uncommon in those days. Okay, because that was how God would defend them, by defeating their enemies. And so we see that God's work is transpiring here, is happening. And so as we look at verse 15 and following, I'm going to ask you to go through verses 15 and 16, please.
So the wall was finished in the 25th day of the month Elul, in 52 days.
52 days to build the wall. Okay, notwithstanding the fact that it was about 70 years between the time that first contingent got there and the walls were finished themselves. Okay, it took 13 years just to build the temple, and now after that, it's taken this long to get around to the business of building the walls because of one thing or another. And so now we see that it is finally, after all this time, they finished it in less than 2 months. All right, keep going.
And it came to pass that when all our enemies heard thereof, and all the heathen that were about us saw these things, they were much cast down in their own eyes, for they perceived that this wreck was wrought out of our God.
That was wrought of God, wrought of our God. And so this is those who are saying, well, our God, their God can't be stronger than our God. Remember, we've got idol worshipers in the area around them as well, of course, which is one of the problems that we see. And so now all of a sudden they see that they've been able through their God to do those things which they were told, they had just told themselves, and they had told the people in the city that they were not going to be able to accomplish, and that not only did they accomplish it, but they accomplished it in a very short order. Okay, because of Nehemiah's strong leadership. All right, and there were other reasons. There were other things that were going on. There were other conspiracies going on. Read through verse 19, please, for us.
Moreover, in those days the nobles of Judah sent many letters unto Tobiah, and the letters of Tobiah came unto them. And there were many in Judah sworn unto him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah,
Him being Tobiah now, okay? All right, keep going.
and the son of Arah, and his son Johanan had taken the daughter of Meshulam, the son of Berechiah. Also, they reported his good deeds before me, and ordered my words to him. And Tobiah sent letters to put me in fear.
And so they conspired, as you will. These people conspired to tell stories that built up Tobiah in the eye, to try to build Tobiah up in the eyes of not just Nehemiah but the people around Nehemiah. Okay, so they talked about how great Tobiah was and how benevolent Tobiah was, and Tobiah they passed information on to Tobiah about what was going on in the city. They spied and they shared information that Nehemiah would probably have preferred they not have. Okay, and so Tobiah then would send letters responding to that to make sure that that they knew that he knew what was going on, and to intimidate them, if you will, to inspire fear. But I want to point out something to you here. We get to go back to verse 18. Many in Judah sworn unto him. Why? Here's why. He was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, the son of Arah, and his son Johanan had taken the daughter of Meshulam, the son of Berechiah, a priest, whose daughter had married the son of Tobiah. So the priest's daughter was so here we are. The Tobiah is the father-in-law of the daughter of one of the priesthood. See, intermarrying worked both ways. Men didn't just take the wives from the countryside. The wives took husbands from the countryside as well. Okay, and so now we've got that alliance that is formed because of that blood relation. Now, I want to point out to you that this family is a family who, and we'll see this as we continue, is one of those families that Ezra had gone back and looked at the lineage, and they had claimed that they were part of the priesthood, but they were not. All right, so we will see that is an issue as we continue on. All right. So now we see that this political alliance is born of relationships, not just political associations, but marital relationships as well. And so then, but the work got done. All right. And so that's how we start chapter 7. Now I want to go ahead of you here, get ahead of myself here, and make sure that you don't be afraid. We're not going to go back and read all of this information that we've already covered in the book of Ezra. Okay, when I talk about the lineage of these people, we're not going to get bogged down in that. All right, but let's just start with chapter 7, verse 1.
Now it came to pass, when the wall was built, and I set up the doors, and the porters, and the singers, and the Levites were appointed, that I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the ruler of this palace, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a faithful man and feared God above many.
Feared God above many. Feared God, really feared God above all. Okay? I want to point something out to you. Well, we'll uh, go ahead and continue through verse 4, please.
And I said unto them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun be hot. And while they stand by, let them shut the doors and bar them, and appoint watches of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, everyone in his watch, and everyone to be over against his house. Now the city was large and great, but the people were few therein, and the houses were not built.
And that was a problem for them, okay? And a problem that Nehemiah was going to have to solve, okay? But the wall, as we say, it came to pass, the wall was built. And then, of course, the doors were put in place, and they were preparing for a celebration to have that happen. But he's turning over control. Remember, he's been the governor. He's been the governor, and his job was to get that built. So he needs to turn over the governance of the city to someone else so he can continue to oversee the necessary work of A, populating the city, and B, rebuilding the houses so these people have places to live. Okay? And so that is his task is not done. All right. But then he says he gave the control to his brother and also to the man named Hananiah who was in charge of the palace. So he's appointed them administrators of the city political affairs, more or less. And then he does something that let me see. He says, let me see if I've got that here. The returnees listed. Yeah. Okay, we got that part. All right, now, he said, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun be hot, and while they stand by, let them shut the doors and bar them, and appoint watches of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and everyone on his watch, and everyone to be over against his house. Why? Why would they do that? Okay? When the most oriental cities, the pattern of behavior was that the gates would be opened at sunrise. Okay? But that's assuming that you've got a pacified environment on the outside. Remember that they are opposed. And so he says, wait till the sun's high in the sky. That way, if there's somebody out there hiding, they're going to get burned up, they're going to get hot, and they're going to get discouraged, and they're going to go away. So make sure that the sun is up high enough that you can see everything before you open the gates. The gates then were manned by guards. And that's what he talks about when he says, while they stand by, he's talking about the guards who are standing at the gate while the gate is open. The only time those guards are relieved and taken off the watch is after the gates are closed. At which time now they would then, each man according to the house wherein he lives, is what they're saying here, everyone to his watch, everyone to be over against his house. Those people who lived in that vicinity, up against that wall, up against that house, would be charged with manning the parapet, so to speak, manning the walls and standing watch during the night. So they watched by night and they guarded by day. So there was always somebody in the watchtower, but at night the walls were manned. Okay, to prevent incursions. And so, but now we see a problem which is has to be solved, and that is there are too few people to populate this city. And so he has to find ways to bring people in from the outer areas. And so the first thing he does is because he wants to make sure that the people that we bring in are faithful Jews, that they're not people who are coming in to subvert. And subversion and insurrection is something that he has had to deal with. Sedition is one of those things he's had to deal with constantly. From the outside, yes, but from the inside, and that makes it even harder. You know, our worst enemies will be from within us. Our worst, up until the assault on the Twin Towers, our worst acts were of sabotage, terrorism, were domestic terrorists. And domestic terrorism is still a problem that has to be faced. Okay, so But when we look at this and we see that God has, in his mind, he has received another commission from God, and that is to ensure the religious purity of the city, to reestablish that religious separation, and to make sure that there are no idolaters within the walls. Remember, that's how they ended up in Babylon in the first place. Okay? All right, so verse 5.
And my God put into mine heart to gather together the nobles and the rulers and the people, that they might be reckoned by genealogy. And I found a register of the genealogy of them which came up at the first, and found written therein, these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity of those that had been carried away, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away, and came again to Jerusalem and to Judah, every one unto his city.
Okay, so he went digging through the records because he knew that there was a record somewhere of all those people that had come in. And he knew that he had those records, and he could account for those people and their lineage by using those records to make sure that those who were remaining within the walls were basically authorized by God, as it were, to be there. Okay, and so he says he finds a document that starts out, these are the children of the province that went up out of the captivity, etc., etc. Who do you think wrote that? Where have we seen that before? That's Ezra. He found Ezra's records. He found Ezra's reckoning, and this long list, this long genealogy that we see that follows, we've already been through, or we skipped over it, we glossed over it once before, and that is the list that Ezra compiled of those 40,000 plus who were the first contingent to come in to Jerusalem to build the temple. Okay, and so that's what we're looking at now. I'm going to back up here because I skipped over something that I want to cover because I really want to. We're going to probably skip over this list and jump ahead when we come back next week, and we're going to probably jump ahead somewhere back in around verse 61 or so at the end of the list, because there's some movements going on, some movements that Ezra had to take care of, and some movements now that Nehemiah has to address as well, that we will see related to making sure that only faithful Jews are remaining inside the walls. But I want to point something out to you. I'm going to back it up real quick because I skipped over, and I think it's pertinent as we prepare to break here, and that is that we see that the problems that Nehemiah faced rebuilding Jerusalem were ridicule and wrath, snorting, making fun of them, belittlement, discouragement, fear, concerns about their own personal safety, confusion over what they were doing and why they were doing it, internal strife, doctrinal issues, and cliques that were being formed, etc., etc. Laziness, people not wanting to do the work that was necessary to build to build their faith and sustain their faith, to build, in this case, the city. Okay, satanic subtlety and compromise, doctrinal compromise that was being made, compromises that were being made to try to maybe bring more people in to provide the work. People wanted to have that done, or compromises so that some people would be able to avoid doing the work of the rebuilding, okay? And lying prophets, lying false teachers, false preachers, okay? So my point here is that the rebuilding of the city, the rebuilding of the walls, the events that went on, this is a physical representation. You know, God uses the course of human events to rough us into the spiritual realities that we need to face. This construction process, this building process that's been going on with the temple and with the city of Jerusalem and the problems that they faced are symbolic of the spiritual problems that we face in building and sustaining our church. Yes, ma'am. The word prophets there means preachers, false preachers. Yes, ma'am. And that's what he's talking about. They were priests. They were members of the priesthood and or prophets and prophetesses as the case were. Remember that there were prophetesses in the Jewish religion. Nehemiah knew that. He understood the relationships that they had. Remember that he had faced opposition by the church leaders. He had faced opposition by the priesthood themselves because he came in and shook things up. Now, we don't know where Ezra was at this particular point in time. We do know that Ezra may have been busy doing something else in country, or he may have returned to make his report to the Persian king as well, returning and continuing to.
Well, I was going to ask before, but you said that they were lying prophets. Actually, why would a prophet try to put him in fear?
Why would a prophet what?
Try to put Nehemiah in fear.
Try to put Nehemiah what?
Into fear.
Into fear? Okay. Try to create, because these priests, when you say prophet, these priests were corrupt. Essentially, Nehemiah had to deal with a corrupt priesthood, and he had to purge the ranks. And there were family relationships which got in the way. You know, that happens a lot, by the way, whenever, and probably one of the, I know of a congregation wherein there was an unscriptural divorce and an unscriptural marriage, and the elder's family was involved, and the elder left, and the church split, literally split. Okay? Because of it. I mean, we're talking, they lost like a third of their congregation over that, over the divorce, because the elder would not condemn it, would not tell them. He allowed the family to come in, a family of the unscriptural marriage, the unscriptural divorce and remarriage, brought the family in and did not tell them that was something that the church could not stand for, that they were not lawfully married. All right? That's a tough position to take. It's a challenging position, but you think it's hard. You think it's harsh, but I want to point something out to you, okay? This is how and why we have so few who are qualified to be elders in churches today. And it is why some churches, even with elders, will discourage preaching against marriage, divorce, preaching on the subject of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Because there are people who will be offended, who will leave and cut the purse strings. And that's how churches die. They may continue to grow physically, but they will die spiritually. Phil.
This is almost a precursor to what we find in Acts 20, when the writer
Ravening wolves?
Yes. Ferocious wolves from within.
From within.
And it's a prediction of the falling away.
Yep.
And a perversion of the gospel.
It's a model of the falling away. It is literally a model of the falling away. And so we see that God's relationship with his people is in and of itself a living parable of the spiritual building process and defense of the faith process in the church. And that's a great point. Thank you, Phil.
It's a matter of power. More likely, the writer of Acts is talking about
Yeah.
And that's what happened, is you had an elder that wanted to have authority over several congregations.
Well, John wrote about Diotrephes.
Yeah.
So there it is. And that happened. Okay. Are there any other questions?
I just wanted to mark it perfectly. Are you saying we're in verse 7?
Yeah, we're not gonna belabor the point and go through the reading of this list again. We skipped it over. We skipped it in Ezra, and I don't see any problem with skipping it now. Okay. So we're going to be right around, I'd say right around 61.
Verse 61 is where we will be.
Yeah. So he used the book of Ezra, he used that record of Ezra as a starting point to take assay of what he had on hand so that he would know what he needed. He's considering the cost, as Christ said, so that whenever they start to build, they won't fail and they won't bring derision upon themselves. Okay? All right. So we'll be back in verse 61 of chapter 8, chapter 7. When we come back together next Sunday morning. Back at